She slept on church steps for 4 days until a lonely rancher said, "Let's go home." In a town where the church bell is the only sound breaking the silence, folks walked past her as if she didn't exist. Cold nights, empty hands. No one dared to help. But then a widowed rancher, broken by his own losses, stopped. He offered her a place by the fire, thinking it was just an act of mercy. What he didn't know was that this girl carried a secret strong enough to divide the whole town. A claim to land, a past of betrayal, and the power to change his life forever. Now whispers spread through the dusty streets, and enemies circle closer, ready to burn down everything he still holds dear. Will taking her in save them both or cost them everything? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. To the pale winter sun crept over the eastern ridge, painting long shadows across the frozen ground behind Gabriel Dunbar's weathered cabin. His breath came out in white puffs as he positioned another log on the chopping block. The sharp crack of his axe splitting wood echoed through the still morning air, a sound as familiar to him now as his own heartbeat. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow despite the biting cold. And that's when he spotted it again, the ragged stray dog sitting quietly atop the ridge. It had been there every morning for the past few days, just watching. The animal's coat was a mottled brown, thin in places, showing the hard life it had lived. Like him, Gabriel thought, it seemed to prefer keeping its distance from others. The dog's ears perked forward, but it made no move to come closer. Gabriel returned to his work, the rhythm of the axe marking time as the morning wore on. Every so often, he'd glance up, finding those watchful eyes still fixed on him by midday. His woodpile had grown considerable, enough to last through the coming cold spell. His shoulders ached from the labor, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that helped quiet his mind. The dog remained in its spot, patient as a statue. Later, as evening settled in and Gabriel sat down to his solitary supper of beans and cornbread, he found himself looking out the cabin's window toward his silent companion. The dog's outline was barely visible in the gathering dusk, but he knew it was there. "Reckon you're wondering why a man eats alone every night?" Gabriel said aloud, surprising himself. His voice sounded rough from disuse. He couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken to anyone, even himself. "Lost my Sarah 3 winters ago. Fever took her quick like." The dog's head tilted slightly, as if listening. Gabriel pushed his half-eaten supper aside and moved closer to the window. Been just me since then. Folks in town tried to help at first, bringing food and offering company. But after a while, he trailed off, remembering how he'd turned them all away, one by one, until they stopped coming. "Can't say I blame them," he continued, watching as the dog shifted position on the ridge. Man can only take so much of another's grief before it starts weighing on his own spirit. The confession felt strange on his lips, but somehow easier with this unlikely audience. The dog neither judged nor offered unwanted comfort. It simply was there, a presence that somehow made the cabin feel less empty. As darkness crept across the land, the dog finally rose and melted into the timber like a ghost. Gabriel watched the spot where it had disappeared, feeling the familiar loneliness settle back around his shoulders like a heavy blanket. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Each morning, Gabriel would emerge into the cold dawn to tackle his chores, and there would be the dog keeping its silent vigil. He found himself looking forward to seeing it, though he never made any attempt to approach. Something about their unspoken arrangement felt right to broken creatures, finding comfort in each other's distant company. During his daily tasks, mending fences, tending to his few remaining cattle, checking his trap lines, he'd catch glimpses of the dog moving parallel to him along the ridge, always maintaining that respectful distance. Sometimes, when the wind was right, he could swear he heard the soft pad of its feet in the snow. His evening conversations through the window became longer, more personal. He told the dog about Sarah, how they'd met at a church social, how her laugh could fill a room, how skilled she'd been at coaxing flowers to grow in the harsh mountain soil. He spoke of their dreams for the ranch, the family they'd planned to raise, the future that had died with her. "Never thought I'd find myself talking to a dog," he admitted one evening, watching as his breath frosted the window pane. Sarah Wood liked you, though. She always had a soft spot for strays. He paused, wiping the glass clear with his sleeve. Course, she'd have already coaxed you inside with some leftover stew by now. The dog's ears twitched at his words, but it made no move to leave its post. Gabriel found himself grateful for that. He wasn't ready for anything more than this simple sharing of space with another living creature that asked nothing of him but his presence. As he worked through his daily tasks, Gabriel began to notice small changes in himself. The crushing weight of silence didn't press quite so hard on his chest. He caught himself humming old hymns as he split wood, something he hadn't done since Sarah passed. Even his prayers, long abandoned in anger and grief, started returning short. Hesitant things at first, but prayers nonetheless. One particularly cold evening, as Gabriel laid out his bedroll near the hearth, he found himself looking toward the window one last time. The dog would be gone by now, having retreated to whatever shelter it called home, but he spoke anyway, his voice soft in the firelit cabin. "Maybe you're right, Sarah," he whispered, remembering how she'd always insisted that God's mercy found ways to reach even the most isolated hearts. "Maybe he does still send company, even to broken men like me." The fire crackled softly in response, its warm light casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Outside, a gentle snow began to fall, covering the day's tracks in a clean white blanket. Gabriel pulled his blanket closer, feeling, for the first time in years, something that might have been hope stirring in his chest. Gabriel woke to the cabin's timbers groaning under assault from fierce winds. The storm had built through the night, transforming the peaceful snowfall into something wilder, more threatening. He stirred the banked coals in the hearth, adding kindling until flames caught and pushed back the pre-dawn darkness at the window. Snow whipped past in horizontal streaks. The ridge where the dog usually sat was barely visible through the whiteout. Conditions. Gabriel prepared his morning coffee, glancing repeatedly toward that spot as the sky lightened to a flat pewter gray. The dog had never failed to appear at first light before. "Storm's got you holed up somewhere safe, I expect," he muttered. But uncertainty gnawed at him as morning crawled toward noon. The dog's absence weighed heavier on his mind. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the shutters and driving snow through every crack. Still, Gabriel found himself returning to the window again and again, searching for that familiar silhouette. By midday, his unease had grown into something he couldn't ignore. "Fool notion," he grumbled, pulling on his heavy coat and gloves. But he was already moving toward the barn, his boots crunching through fresh fallen snow. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding, nickered at his approach. Gabriel worked quickly, brushing off accumulated snow and securing the saddle. "Sorry, old friend," he said, tightening the cinch. "Weather's foul, but something ain't right." They pushed out into the storm, horse and rider leaning into the wind. Gabriel steered them first toward the creek bottoms, where the stream might offer some shelter. The snow was deep here, drifted against the banks. His eyes searched constantly, looking for any sign of movement, any dark shape against the white. The hours wore on as they worked their way up toward timberline, checking each hollow and stand of trees. The gelding plowed steadily through the snow, but Gabriel could feel him tiring. The light was starting to fade when they reached the upper slopes, where wind-twisted pines stood like sentinels in the gathering gloom. That's when he saw them tracks. partially filled with fresh snow, but still visible. Paw prints, larger than a coyote's, moving alongside smaller impressions that could only be human footprints. A child's, by the size of them. Gabriel's heart quickened. He dismounted, leading his horse as he followed the trail. The tracks led toward a deep ravine where the land dropped away sharply between rocky walls. As they descended, the wind's howl diminished, replaced by an eerie stillness. The tracks ended at the base of a large boulder. At first, Gabriel saw only the dog lying still and frozen, its coat rimed with ice. Then his eyes found her, a small figure curled against the stone, one hand clutched around the dog's leather collar. An Apache girl, no more than 14 or 15 years old, her clothes inadequate for the brutal cold Dot. Gabriel dropped to his knees beside her. Her skin was pale beneath its natural bronze, her lips cracked and blue-tinged. When he pressed fingers against her neck, he found a pulse, thready and weak. But there, "Hold on, child," he whispered, shrugging out of his heavy coat. He wrapped it around her slight frame, his movements gentle but urgent. The dog's body was stiff with rigor mortis, the collar still gripped in the girl's frost-bitten fingers. With care, he worked it free, tucking it into his shirt pocket. Lifting her was easier than he expected. She weighed almost nothing, all bones and frozen clothes. Getting her onto the horse proved trickier, but Gabriel managed it, mounting behind her and cradling her against his chest. He cast one last look at the dog's body, a lump forming in his throat. "Thank you," he said softly to the animal that had led him here. "I understand now why you came." The journey back was slow and treacherous. Gabriel kept one arm tight around the girl while guiding his horse through the deepening snow. The storm had intensified, cutting visibility to mere feet ahead. He relied on his years of experience on this land, trusting his instincts and his mount's sure-footedness to bring them home. The girl never stirred, but he could feel her shallow breathing against his arm. He found himself praying, really praying, for the first time in years. "Lord, if you're still listening to the likes of me, help me get her home. Don't let that dog's sacrifice be for nothing." It was full dark by the time the cabin's outline emerged from the swirling snow. Gabriel's arms ached from holding the girl, and his horse was stumbling with exhaustion. He managed to get her inside and laid her gently before the fire, which had burned down to coals during his absence, working. Quickly, he built up the fire until it roared, casting warm light across the cabin's interior. The girl's clothes were soaked through. Her hands, when he examined them, showed the white patches of frostbite. He wrapped them carefully in clean cloths, then covered her with every blanket he owned. Only then did he remember the dog's collar, still in his pocket. He placed it on the table, the leather stiff and cold. In the firelight, he could make out marks carved into it, not a name or owner's brand, but symbols he didn't recognize. Apache symbols, he guessed, though their meaning escaped him. Gabriel sank into his chair, suddenly bone-weary. The collar sat before him like a question, a link between the mysterious dog that had kept him company these past days and the half-frozen child by his hearth. What chain of events had brought her here? What was she running from, or to? The girl's breathing remained shallow but steady. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the cabin's walls, an unexpected peace settled over Gabriel. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for now, he had a clear purpose: keep her alive, help her heal, and honor the faithful animal that had led him to her. He settled in for a long night's vigil, watching the rise and fall of her chest. Beneath the blankets, listening to the fire's crackle and the wind's moan. The collar on the table caught occasional glints of firelight, its carved symbols holding secrets he knew would eventually need to be understood. Morning light crept through the cabin's frost-etched windows. Gabriel stirred from his chair where he'd kept vigil through the night. His bones ached from the awkward position, but his attention remained fixed on the girl bundled before the hearth. Her color had improved, though her breathing still came shallow and quick. He moved to the kitchen area, keeping his footsteps quiet as he prepared a pot of chicken broth. The familiar routine of stoking the fire and gathering supplies helped settle his troubled thoughts. The soup had been meant for his own supper, but the girl needed it more. While the broth heated, Gabriel checked her bandaged hands. The frostbite worried him. He'd seen men lose fingers to the cold before. The white patches hadn't spread, but her skin felt ice cold despite the cabin's warmth. He added another log to the fire, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. The girl stirred at the sound, her eyelids fluttering. Gabriel ladled some broth into a tin cup, testing its temperature with a careful finger. Not too hot, just warm enough to bring some life back to her frozen body. Easy now, he murmured, sitting beside her. You need to drink something. Her eyes opened fully for the first time, dark and alert despite her weakness. She tried to push herself up, but her bandaged hands wouldn't support her weight. Gabriel slipped an arm behind her shoulders, helping her sit against the wall. Small sips, he said, holding the cup to her cracked lips. That's right. She managed a few swallows before turning her face away. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. Avery. What's that? My name, Avery. The words came hesitant and accented, but clear enough. I'm Gabriel, he replied, offering the cup again. Gabriel Dunbar. She took another sip, her eyes never leaving his face. Though her English seemed limited, he could see understanding in her expression as he spoke. There was wariness there too, but not the blind fear he might have expected. You're safe here, he added, unsure how much she comprehended. The storms. Past Avery nodded slightly, indicating she understood more than she could say. Gabriel helped her finish most of the broth before checking her bandages again. The wrappings needed changing, and he worked as gently as he could, trying not to cause additional pain to her damaged fingers. You need to stay in bed, he said firmly, when she tried to rise, at least until your strength returns. She subsided. Without argument, though her eyes followed his movements as he went about his morning chores. Gabriel found himself talking as he worked, explaining what he was doing in simple terms. It felt strange after so many months of silence, but Avery seemed to take comfort in the sound of his voice. As evening approached, Gabriel prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread. The routine tasks couldn't distract him from the decision weighing on his mind. The army post was only 20 miles away. They'd know what to do with an Apache girl found in the snow. It would be the proper thing, the expected thing. He glanced at Avery, who had dozed off again near the fire. The dog's collar lay beside her, her bandaged hand resting on it, even in sleep. The carved symbols caught the firelight, reminding him of the mystery that had brought her to his door. The beans bubbled on the stove, filling the cabin with their warm aroma. Gabriel stirred them mechanically, his thoughts churning. The neighbors would notice eventually if she stayed. Questions would be asked. In these parts, harboring an Apache could bring trouble he didn't need. Avery woke as he was setting out the food. She struggled to sit up, and he helped her, propping her against the wall with a blanket behind her back. When he offered her a plate, she clutched the dog's collar tighter, the word barely audible: family. The simple word struck him like a physical blow. How many families had been torn apart by the wars, the forced relocations, the broken treaties? The collar in her hands might be all she had left of whoever she'd lost. Gabriel ate his supper in silence, the decision haunting him. The proper course seemed clear enough. Alert the authorities, let them handle it. But something held him back. Maybe it was the memory of the dog, faithfully watching his cabin for days before leading him to her. Maybe it was the trust beginning to show in Avery's eyes, fragile as spring ice. Sleep refused to come that night. Gabriel rocked in his chair, watching the fire die down to coals. The girl's breathing had steadied, becoming deeper and more regular. Outside, an owl called into the darkness, its cry lonely and questioning. Dawn found him still rocking, his mind made up. He would keep her, at least for now. The risks were real, but he couldn't bring himself to turn her away. Not after everything. That had happened. He offered up a quiet prayer, asking for guidance, for wisdom to know the right path. When Avery awoke, he had fresh bread warming by the fire. She accepted a piece with bandaged fingers, eating slowly while watching him with those careful eyes. There was trust there now, beneath the wariness trust he prayed he could live up to. The morning light streamed through the windows, painting the cabin's interior in shades of gold. Gabriel busied himself with the day's tasks, all the while aware of Avery's gaze following him. They had a long road ahead, full of uncertainty. But for now, this fragile piece would have to be enough. The morning sun had finally warmed the crusted snow enough for travel. Gabriel stood in the barn, hitching his team to the wagon while mentally listing the supplies they needed in town. Behind him, boots crunched on frozen hay. "I come too." Avery's voice was stronger now, though still heavily accented. Gabriel turned, to find her wrapped in his old wool coat, her bandaged hands tucked into the sleeves. "You should rest," he said, though he knew the stubborn look in her eyes by now. 3 days of recovery had brought color back to her cheeks, but she still moved carefully. "Need things," she insisted, pointing at her borrowed clothes. "I help." "Carry," he sighed, knowing she was right. The girl needed proper clothes and supplies of her own. Still, taking her into town meant facing questions he wasn't ready to answer. "All right," he conceded, "but stay close to the wagon." The drive into town took longer than usual, the wagon wheels breaking through ice-crusted ruts. Gabriel kept the team at a steady walk, mindful of his passenger. Avery sat beside him on the bench, taking in everything with watchful eyes. As they approached the cluster of wooden buildings that made up the town, Gabriel felt tension creep into his shoulders. Ovi must have sensed it too. She pulled the coat collar higher around her face. They hitched the wagon outside Miller's General Store. Already, Gabriel could see faces turning toward them through the shop windows. He helped Avery down, steadying her when she stumbled slightly. The store's bell jangled as they entered. Old Man Miller looked up from his ledger, his friendly greeting dying on his lips when he saw Avery. The other customers, Mrs. Patterson. Selecting fabric, young Tom Watson weighing nails, fell silent. Gabriel cleared his throat. "Morning, Jim. Need some supplies." Miller nodded stiffly, his eyes never leaving Avery. "What can I get you?" Gabriel began listing items while Avery examined a shelf of tin cups, her bandaged hands clasped tightly together. He added clothes to his usual order, sturdy work clothes that might fit her with some alterations. As Miller gathered the supplies, he gestured Gabriel closer to the counter. "Word of advice, Dunbar," he said, quietly. "Folks round here got long memories about Indian troubles. You keep company with her kind, might find yourself short unwelcome at certain establishments." Heat rose in Gabriel's chest. "She's a child." "Jim, she's Apache," Miller countered. "Think about your standing in the community." Gabriel paid for the supplies without another word, his jaw tight. Aubrey helped load the wagon, her movements precise despite her healing hands. Neither spoke as they continued down the muddy street. The church stood at the end of town, its white painted, boards bright against the winter sky. Reverend Mason descended the steps as they passed, raising a hand in greeting. "Gabrielle, Kay, haven't seen you at services lately?" Gabriel reined the team to a stop, touching his hat brim. "Reverend?" The preacher's kind face showed concern as he glanced at Avery. "I heard you had taken in a guest." He lowered his voice. "While Christian charity is admirable, you might want to consider the trouble such arrangements could bring." The Army. Post has procedures for handling these situations. She was half frozen in the snow, Gabriel said. What procedures would you recommend, Reverend? Leaving her there, Mason's expression softened. Of course not. But surely there are more suitable solutions then. He trailed off as Avery met his gaze steadily. Something in her quiet dignity seemed to unsettle him. Good day, Reverend, Gabriel said, flicking the reins. The wagon lurched forward, leaving Mason standing in the street. They were well out of town before Avery spoke. People talk fast here. That they do, Gabriel agreed grimly. News spreads quick as wildfire in these parts. Why they fear me? Her question held genuine confusion. I am one girl. Gabriel considered how to explain decades of conflict, broken treaties, and deep-rooted prejudice. Some folks can't see past old hurts, he said, finally. They remember raids and fighting. Forget that both sides lost people they loved. Avery nodded slowly. My father, he'd know this land before. Had papers for cattle. She reached into her coat pocket, pulling out the dog's collar. See here. Gabriel studied the carved symbols she pointed to. What he'd taken for decoration now looked more like numbers. A brand mark, maybe, or a grazing permit number. Father signed paper with white men, she continued. Say we could graze here, share grass, but then bad winters come. Many cattle die. Father, too. Her voice caught. Some say paper no good anymore. We must leave. Gabriel frowned, memories stirring. He'd heard talk years ago about Apache graziers being pushed off their permitted lands after several harsh winters decimated their herds. The local ranchers had claimed the grazing rights expired when the cattle died. This was your father's land? He asked carefully. Part. Avery traced the symbols on the collar. Share with others. Good grass here, he say. Water in dry times. She looked up at Gabriel. You find water easy on your land? Not lately, he admitted. The last 2 summers had been dry, his stock ponds shrinking to mud. Used to be better. Father know where springs hide, she said. Teach me signs to look for. I can show you. Gabriel studied her face, searching for deception. The idea that her family might have legitimate claim to his grazing rights was troubling. But there was only earnest hope in her expression. Hope that sharing her knowledge might prove her worth keeping around. The sun was setting when they reached the cabin. Gabriel unloaded the supplies while Avery carried smaller packages inside. The temperature was dropping fast with nightfall. In the cabin, Gabriel added extra wood to the stove, watching the flames catch. Outside, snow clouds were gathering again. He thought about Miller's warning, Mason's concern, the neighbors who would soon be talking. Taking in an Apache girl was risky enough. Harboring one who might have claim to his land was asking for real trouble. But as he watched, Avery carefully putting away the new supplies, handling each item like a treasure, he knew he'd already chosen his path. Whatever came, he wouldn't send her away. Not to freeze in the snow, not to face the Army's procedures, not to lose the last connection to her father's legacy. The stove crackled, warming the cabin's air. Gabriel hung his coat by the door, remembering another night not so long ago when he'd talked to a lonely dog through the window. Maybe God did still send company to broken men, just not always in the form they expected. The January days stretched into February, each sunrise bringing new rhythms to the cabin. Gabriel noticed how Avery's presence changed the quiet knot. By filling it with chatter, but by making it feel less empty. Her soft footsteps on the wooden floors, the gentle clinking of tin cups at breakfast. Even her careful breathing as she concentrated on mending clothes, it all wove together into something that felt almost like home again. One crisp morning, Avery stood at the edge of the frozen creek, her breath making clouds in the air. Look here, she said, pointing to dried reeds poking through the snow. See how they bend? Gabriel knelt beside her, studying the pale stalks. They curved slightly, different from the straight ones nearby. Water moves underground, she explained. Makes plants grow different. Father, teach me. Look for signs like this. She led him along the creek bed, stopping to press her ear against the frozen earth. Gabriel watched, remembering how his own father had taught him to read the land. But this was different knowledge, passed down through generations who had survived in these hills long before his family arrived. Here, Avery said finally, marking. A spot with a stick. Good place for well. Gabriel had been struggling with a failing well near the eastern pasture. The water had grown brackish last summer, forcing his cattle to travel further for drinking. He'd been considering selling some of the herd if he couldn't solve the problem by spring. They worked together for days, Avery showing him how to test the soil, how to listen for the subtle sounds of underground streams. When they finally struck water, it burst forth clean and sweet. Gabriel watched it flow, amazed at how this girl's knowledge had transformed a dead corner of his land into something life-giving. Their evenings settled into comfortable routine. Gabriel would stoke the fire while Avery set out bowls of stew or beans. She was eager to learn new words, pointing to objects and repeating their names carefully. Sometimes she would share words from her own language, teaching Gabriel to say thank you or good morning in Apache. What is this called? She asked one night, holding up the wooden spoon she was using to stir the beans. Spoon, Gabriel said, then smiled slightly, though some folks around here might say spoon. Avery's laugh was quiet but genuine. Spoon, she repeated, testing the word. English has many ways to say things. Gabriel noticed how his grief, while still present, had softened around the edges. The sharp pain of his wife's absence had gentled into something more bearable. Having someone to care for, to teach and learn from, had given him purpose beyond mere survival. The land seemed to respond to their combined care. Gabriel's practiced ranching knowledge merged with Avery's traditional understanding, and slowly the ranch began to thrive. New grass sprouted in previously barren patches. Springs that had run dry began to trickle again. But their peaceful routine was shattered one morning in late February. Gabriel was checking fence lines when he heard hoofbeats approaching. Deputy? Harlan rode up, his usually stern face even more serious than normal. Morning, Dunbar, the deputy said, not dismounting. He pulled an official-looking envelope from his coat. Got some papers here you need to see. Gabriel took the envelope, his stomach tightening as he read. The railroad was pushing west again, claiming land through legal channels and other means. His ranch lay directly in their planned path. They're offering to buy you out, Harlan said, though his tone suggested it wasn't really an offer. Railroads got government backing this time. Might want to consider taking what they're willing. To give, Gabriel's jaw clenched. This is my land, deputy. Uppity to prove it. Harlan shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Listen, Dunbar, I'm trying to help here. Words got around about that Apache girl you're keeping. Railroad agent Carver, he's been asking questions, making notes about potential security risks to the line. Security risks. Gabriel's voice was dangerously quiet. She's 14 years old. Don't matter to them. They'll use whatever they can to force you out if you don't sell willing. Harlan glanced toward the cabin. Might be best to send her to the army post before things get complicated. For her own safety, you understand? Gabriel's hand tightened on the papers. That all you came to say, deputy? Harlan sighed. Just think about it, Dunbar. Railroads bring in progress, whether we like it or not. Don't make things harder than they need to be. He touched his hat brim and turned his horse. Riding away across the frosted grass, Gabriel stood for a long time, reading and rereading the papers. The amount they offered was insultingly low, but that wasn't what worried him most. If the railroad decided to use Avery's presence against him, they could bring more than just legal pressure to bear. When he returned to the cabin, Avery was at the table, carefully copying letters from an old primer he'd found. She looked up as he entered, her expression changing when she saw his face. "Bad news comes," she said. It wasn't a question. Gabriel sat heavily in his chair. "The railroad wants the land. They're pushing west, laying tracks. Our ranch is in their way." Avery's face paled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "They take land before. From my people, too, there's more," Gabriel said quietly. "The deputy warned me they might use you as an excuse. Claim you're a threat. Use that to force me out." He met her eyes directly. "I need you to understand, this isn't just about the ranch anymore. It's about keeping you safe, too." Avery was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing the dog's collar that still lay on the table. "You want me to leave?" she asked finally, her voice small but resolved. "Make things easier." "No," Gabriel said firmly, surprising himself with how quickly and certainly the answer came. "No, I don't want you to leave. We'll figure this out." Together, relief flickered across her face, followed by determination. "Fathers say water gives life, but also shows way. Maybe what he teach me can help save your land." Gabriel nodded slowly, hope mixing with worry in his chest. The railroad was powerful, backed by money and government forces. But looking at Avery's quiet strength, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: the will to fight for something bigger than himself. "Our land," he corrected gently. "We'll save our land." The church bell tolled across the frosty morning air as Gabriel guided his wagon down the rutted main street. Avery sat beside him, her back straight despite her obvious tension. She wore her cleanest dress, patched carefully the night before, and had braided her dark hair neatly. The dog's collar lay in her lap, its worn leather telling silent stories of belonging. "You don't have to do this," Gabriel said quietly as they approached the weathered church building. Several townsfolk already gathered on the steps turned to stare, their whispers carrying on the crisp breeze. "Yes," Avery replied, her voice steady, though her hands gripped the collar tighter. "I do." They hitched the wagon and walked toward the church hall, boots crunching on frozen ground. Gabriel noticed how some people stepped back, creating space around them. Others simply watched, their faces a mix of curiosity and disapproval. A few nodded slightly, mostly those whose homes he'd visited during hard times, delivering firewood or helping with repairs. Inside, the hall smelled of coffee and wood smoke. Wooden benches lined the walls, and a pot-bellied stove radiated warmth in one corner. The regular Sunday service had ended, but most of the congregation remained for the town meeting. Gabriel guided Avery to a bench near the back, aware of the ripple of murmurs that followed their movement. Preacher Matthews stood at the front, his lined face serious as he called the meeting to order. "Brothers and sisters," he began, "we have several matters to discuss today, including the railroad's proposed expansion through our territory." For the next hour, Gabriel listened as various townspeople voiced concerns about water rights, property lines, and compensation offers. Some spoke of progress and opportunity. Others worried about losing generations of family land. Through it all, Avery sat silently beside him, her fingers tracing the edges of the collar. Finally, Warren Cooper, a rancher from the North Valley, stood up. "There's another matter we need to address," he said, turning to face Gabriel and Avery. "Some of us are concerned about certain elements being harbored in our community." The room grew quiet. Gabriel felt Avery stiffen beside him. "Dunbar's been keeping an Apache girl out at his place," Cooper continued. "With all the raids we've seen," when Gabriel interrupted, rising to his feet. "When was the last raid anywhere near here?" 2 years ago. 3. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of those he'd helped in the past. Some of you remember last winter, when the snows came early. Remember who brought wood to your widows, helped dig out your stuck cattle. Sarah Miller, whose husband had died the previous year, spoke up softly. Gabriel brought us firewood every week, never asked for anything in return. That's different, Cooper protested. We're talking about a child, Gabriel cut in, his voice firm, but controlled. A 14-year-old girl who needed help and found it. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? What this church teaches? Preacher Matthews raised his hands, for quite as voices began to rise from different corners. Perhaps we should hear from the girl herself, he suggested, his tone gentle but authoritative. Gabriel felt Avery trembling slightly as she stood. The room fell silent again, all eyes turning to her. She held the collar in both hands, and Gabriel could see her gathering her courage. My father, she began, her English careful and measured. He signed paper. Grazing rights? She held up the collar. This proof, his mark here on leather. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. He teach me land, where water flow underground, how to make dry earth give life again. She paused, looking around the room. I help Mr. Dunbar find new water on his ranch, make wells better. This land, her voice caught slightly, but she pressed on. This land was my father's home too. He respect it. Teach me, respect it. The silence that followed felt heavy with possibility. Gabriel watched faces in the crowd shift from surprise to thoughtfulness. Even Cooper seemed taken aback by her clear, dignified speech. Preacher Matthews stepped forward, studying Avery with kind eyes. These are serious matters you bring before us, he said. The question of land rights, of who belongs where, these require prayer and careful consideration. He turned to address the room. I suggest we take time to reflect on what we've heard today, to search our hearts and ask for guidance. People began to stir, some nodding in agreement, others still frowning in disapproval. The meeting dispersed. Slowly, with clusters of townspeople gathering to discuss what they'd heard. A few approached Gabriel, including Sarah Miller, who smiled warmly at Avery. You're welcome to join us for Sunday dinner sometime, she said quietly. Both of you. The ride home was quiet, but different from the tense silence of their journey into town. Avery sat with her shoulders relaxed, the collar resting in her lap. As they passed the creek where she'd first taught Gabriel about reading the reeds, a small smile touched her lips, the first real smile he'd seen from her. You did well today, Gabriel said, glancing at her. That took courage. Truth needs speaking, she replied simply. Father, teach that too. When they reached the cabin, the sun was setting behind the hills, painting the snow in shades of gold and purple. Gabriel took care of the horses while Avery started supper, their evening routine unchanged by the day's events. But as darkness settled around them, Gabriel placed his rifle by the door before sitting down to eat. Avery noticed her eyes following his movement. You think some people still angry? Best to be careful, Gabriel replied, trying to keep his voice light. Some folks take time to accept change. They ate their beans and cornbread in companionable quiet, but Gabriel's ears stayed tuned to sounds outside the cabin. He knew that while some hearts had been moved today, others might have hardened. The rifle by the door wasn't just about protection. It was a statement that he meant to stand his ground. To defend not just his land, but also this unexpected family. He'd found the first hints of spring crept into the valley like a shy visitor. Tender green shoots pushed through melting snow, and the air carried the promise of warmer days. Gabriel stood at the edge of his freshly tilled field, watching Avery carefully plant potato eyes in the dark soil. Her movements were sure and practiced, following the rhythm her father had taught her years ago. Plant them deep, she explained, demonstrating the proper depth with her hands. Mother Earth protect them better that way. Gabriel nodded, taking mental notes. The girl's knowledge of growing things had already proved invaluable. In just a few weeks, she had shown him better ways to prepare the soil and choose planting spots based on how snow melted across the land. They worked side by side through the morning, the sun warming their backs as they moved down the rows. Gabriel found himself watching Avery when she wasn't looking, noticing how her face had filled out since those first desperate days. Regular meals and hard work had brought color to her cheeks and strength to her frame. After the planting, they moved on to mending fences. Winter storms had taken their toll on the rough-hewn rails, leaving several sections askew or broken. Gabriel showed Avery how to test posts for rot and replace damaged rails. Like this, she asked, setting a rail in place with surprising strength. That's right, Gabriel confirmed, feeling a surge of pride. You're a quick learner. A flash of pleasure crossed her face at the praise, and she ducked her head to hide a small smile. These moments of happiness still seemed to catch her by surprise, as if she wasn't quite sure she deserved them. Their days fell into a comfortable pattern. Mornings began with chores, feeding livestock, checking the new well Avery had helped him dig, tending to whatever needed attention around the ranch. Afternoons brought different tasks with each passing day: planting, repairs, preparing for the cattle that would soon return from winter pasture. In the evenings, they sat at the worn kitchen table, lamplight casting warm shadows on the walls. Gabriel had found his wife's old primer, and he used it to help Avery with her English. She was an eager student, soaking up new words like the spring earth-absorbed rain. Sound it out, Gabriel encouraged one night, pointing to a particularly challenging word. Avery's brow furrowed in concentration. "Th through," she managed, then broke into a sudden laugh of triumph. The sound startled Gabriel so much he nearly knocked over his coffee cup. It was the first real laugh he'd heard from her, bright and clear as a creek in springtime. Something tight in his chest loosened at the sound, and he found himself chuckling too. These moments began happening more often: shared smiles over successful lessons, quiet laughter when the milk cow gave them both trouble, comfortable silence. As they worked together, Gabriel realized one day that he had stopped thinking of Avery as his responsibility and started thinking of her as his daughter. The thought struck him one evening as they sat down to a simple supper of rabbit stew. The savory smell filled the cabin, mingling with the fresh bread Avery had learned to bake. Steam rose from their bowls as Gabriel bowed his head. "Lord," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I thank you for this food." And he paused, feeling Avery's eyes on him. "I thank you for second chances, for sending someone to help this old man remember what family means." Avery's breath caught softly across the table, and Gabriel knew she understood what he was saying. The moment hung between them, warm and precious as summer honey. Then the shot rang out. The sound cracked through the evening air like thunder, sending both of them diving for cover. Gabriel's bowl clattered to the floor as he scrambled for his rifle. "Stay down," he ordered Avery, who had already pressed herself against the wall beside the fireplace. Her eyes were wide but steady, showing more anger than fear. Gabriel moved carefully to the window, staying low and scanning the deepening twilight. Nothing moved outside except the branches stirring in the evening breeze. After several tense minutes, he heard hoofbeats fading into the distance. "Wait here," he told Avery, grabbing his lantern. He checked his rifle was loaded before easing out the door. The spring air had turned cold with nightfall. Gabriel moved cautiously around the cabin, then toward the barn where he thought the shot had come from. His lantern light swung across the weathered boards until it caught something pale fluttering against the wood. A piece of paper had been nailed to the barn door, the edges rippling in the wind. Gabriel yanked it free, holding it close to the lantern. The message was short: written in a crude hand. Send her away or lose everything. His hands shook slightly as he folded the paper and tucked it into his shirt pocket. Anger rose in his throat like bile, not just at the threat, but at the cowardice of it. Shooting in the dark, leaving notes, threatening a child. When he returned to the cabin, Avery stood in the doorway, her slight frame silhouetted against the lamplight inside. Her face showed she already knew what the note must have said. "I not leave," she stated firmly before Gabriel could speak. "This my home now too." Gabriel crossed to her, putting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's not safe. No place safe," she interrupted, her English clear and determined. "But here, I have family." She reached up and squeezed his hand. "We protect each other, yes?" Gabriel looked down at her upturned face, seeing the strength there, the unwavering trust. He thought of how far they'd both come from those first wary days, him from his lonely grief, her from her desperate wandering. They had built something here, something worth fighting for. "Yes," he agreed finally. "We protect each other." They went back inside, but Gabriel kept his rifle close as they finished their meal in watchful silence. Later, as he added wood to the stove for the night, he saw Avery touch the dog's collar that now hung beside the door. A reminder of the faithful companion that had brought them together. The threat cast a shadow over their peaceful routine, but it also strengthened their resolve. As Gabriel banked the fire for the night, he knew there would be more challenges ahead. But looking at Avery, already setting out her primer for tomorrow's lesson, he felt certain they would face them together. The night settled around the cabin, like a dark blanket, broken only by the soft glow of their lamp and the occasional call of early spring peepers in the creek bottom. Father and daughter by choice rather than blood, they had found in each other something worth defending, a second chance at family. Built on trust and chosen day by day. The moon hung high and full over the ranch, casting silver shadows across the yard. Inside the cabin, Gabriel and Avery slept soundly after a long day of work. The spring night was quiet, except for the distant cry of coyotes. A flicker of orange light danced against the cabin walls. At first, it seemed like nothing more than moonlight through the window. Then came the sharp crack of burning wood. Gabriel jerked awake, his heart pounding. The room was filled with an unnatural glow. He rushed to the window and his blood ran cold. The barn was engulfed in flames. "Avery," he shouted, already pulling on his boots. "The barn's on fire." She was up in an instant, grabbing buckets as they burst out the door. Heat slammed into them like a wall. The fire roared, consuming the weathered boards with terrifying speed. Sparks spiraled into the night sky like angry fireflies. "The well?" Gabriel pointed, and they ran. Their shadows stretched long and dark against the flames as they worked. Gabriel hauled up bucket after bucket, while Avery ran them to the barn. Steam hissed where water met fire, but it seemed to make little difference. The stored hay inside was like tinder. Months of careful work, dried and stacked for winter feed, now fueled the inferno. Gabriel's throat burned from smoke as he watched. Years of preparation literally go up in flames. Avery's voice cut through his despair. The horses. The horses. They had gotten the animals out to pasture yesterday, thank God, but the barn held so much more tools. Feed, tack, everything needed to run the ranch. Gabriel's muscles screamed as they worked, throwing bucket after bucket against the hungry. Flames, the sound of hoofbeats, approached through the darkness. Neighbors were arriving, drawn by the fire's glow. They brought more buckets, more hands, but it was too late. The barn's roof groaned and collapsed inward with a shower of sparks. God's judgment, someone muttered in the darkness. Harboring that Indian girl, Gabriel whirled, ready to confront the speaker, but couldn't tell who had said it. The gathered neighbors stood in silence, faces orange in the firelight. Watching the barn burn to the ground, they worked through the night, containing the blaze, keeping it from spreading to the nearby structures. As false dawn began to lighten the sky, the fire finally died to smoldering embers. The neighbors drifted away, leaving Gabriel and Avery alone with the ruins. Gabriel sank down in the ashes, his clothes soaked with sweat and water, his hands raw from the rope and buckets. The rising sun revealed the full extent of the destruction. Blackened beams jutted from the smoking ruins like broken bones. The sweet, sickening smell of burned hay filled the air. Everything he had stored for winter, gone. Tools passed down from his father, destroyed. The tack he had so carefully maintained, reduced to ash. Without feed for the cattle, without proper tools, how could they survive the next winter? He buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by despair. A soft touch on his shoulder made him look up. Avery stood beside him, her face streaked with soot, eyes full of pain, not for herself, but for him. "I go," she said softly. "Then no more trouble for you." Gabriel's heart clenched. He reached up and gripped her small hand in his ash-covered one. "No," he said firmly. "You're not going anywhere." "But the fire," she gestured at the smoking ruins, "because of me." Gabriel pushed himself to his feet, still holding her hand. "Because of hate," he corrected, "and I won't let hate win. We'll rebuild together." Tears welled in Avery's eyes, but she nodded, squeezing his hand. They spent the morning salvaging what they could from the ruins. It wasn't much, some metal, tools that could be cleaned and restored, a few pieces of leather tack that had somehow survived. The real losses were the hay and feed, carefully stored over months of work. As evening approached, exhaustion settled over them like a heavy blanket. They had cleaned up as best they could, though the acrid smell of smoke still clung to everything. Inside the cabin, Gabriel washed the ash from his hands and face, then stood staring at the hearth. Something broke inside him, not in despair this time, but in surrender. Slowly, he lowered himself to his knees before the cold fireplace. "Lord," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I haven't talked to you proper in years. Not since Sarah." He swallowed hard. "I reckon I've been angry, felt like you took everything from me." But now, Avery stood quietly in the doorway, watching as Gabriel struggled to find the words. "I'm asking for mercy, Lord. Not justice. I know I don't deserve that, but mercy. Help me protect this child you've sent to me. Help me be the father she needs." His voice cracked. "Help me find my way back to you." Tears rolled down his weathered cheeks, cutting clean tracks through the lingering soot. "I know I'm broken, Lord. No, I've pushed you away. But if you can find it in your heart to give this old sinner another chance." He heard a small sob and looked up to see tears streaming down Avery's face. She crossed the room and knelt beside him, taking his hand. Together, they stayed there in the growing darkness while outside. The last smoke rose from the ruins of the barn like incense to heaven. When Gabriel finally rose from his knees, something had changed. The weight of grief and bitterness he'd carried for so long felt lighter. He couldn't explain it, but for the first time in years, he felt hope. Real hope, not just grim determination. He looked down at Avery, who was watching him with understanding beyond her years. She had lost everything once, yet found the strength to begin again. Maybe she had been sent not just for him to help her, but for her to help him remember what faith looked like. "We start again tomorrow," she said simply. Gabriel nodded, feeling the familiar calluses of her small hand in his. "Together," he agreed. Outside, the spring wind scattered ashes across the yard. But it also carried the scent of fresh grass and new growth. The land would recover, the barn would be rebuilt, and in the ashes of loss, something new was taking root, a father's renewed faith. a daughter's unwavering trust, and the quiet certainty that they were exactly where God meant them to be. The morning after the fire, Gabriel stood in the barn's ruins, kicking through ashes with the toe of his boot. Here and there, metal glinted, a bent nail, a broken hammerhead, the charred remains of his father's tools. Each discovery felt like finding pieces of his own broken heart. Avery worked beside him, her small hands wrapped in cloth to protect against hot metal. She moved methodically, setting aside anything that might be salvaged. The few items they recovered made a pitiful pile: some twisted horseshoes, a scorched leather bridle, half-melted bucket handles. "Ain't much," Gabriel said, his voice rough. From smoke and fatigue, the spring sunshine felt like mockery, highlighting every blackened beam and scattered ash. Avery picked up a partially burned piece of rope. "We use what we have," she said simply, coiling it carefully, despite its damaged state. Their food stores had been modest even before the fire. Now, with winter's preserved goods running low and spring planting delayed, Gabriel knew they faced lean times ahead. That evening, he measured out their remaining flour with care, making a thin gruel instead of bread. Avery watched him stir the pot, her dark eyes understanding. "Like winter with father," she said softly. "Small portions, but we lived." Gabriel ladled the gruel into 2 bowls, making sure hers was fuller. "Reckon we'll need supplies soon enough," he said, though the thought of facing town made his stomach clench. Can't rebuild without proper tools. The next morning, Gabriel hitched their remaining mule to the wagon. The animal's ribs showed. They all needed better feeding. He checked his wallet, counting the meager bills twice. Not enough, but the storekeeper had extended credit before. "I'll be back before sundown," he told Avery, who stood in the doorway clutching the dog's collar. She nodded, but her eyes held worry. The road to town seemed longer than usual, each bump and rut jarring his tired bones. The wagon's empty bed reminded him of all they'd lost. As he approached the first buildings, he noticed people turning away, hurrying inside as he passed. The general store's bell jangled as he entered. Mr. Peterson, usually friendly enough, barely looked up from his ledger. The silence stretched uncomfortable as Gabriel gathered basic supplies: flour, salt, nails, rope. "Need these on credit," Gabriel said finally, laying everything on the counter. "Good for it, same as always." Peterson's face hardened. "Heard about your barn," he said, still not meeting Gabriel's eyes. "Shame that." "Yes," Gabriel answered carefully. Extent. With the lantern, they both knew it was a lie. "That's so." Peterson closed his ledger with a snap. "Heard other things, too. About you sheltering trouble up there." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "The girl ain't trouble." "Way I hear it, she's the reason for your misfortune." Peterson finally looked up, his face set. "Can't extend credit to a man bringing danger to honest folks. Best you pay cash or leave empty-handed." Gabriel's hands curled into fists, but he forced them to relax. Fighting wouldn't help Avery. Without a word, he counted out what little cash he had, leaving with only flour and salt. The nails and rope would have to wait. The sun was low when he finally turned up the road to home, his heart heavy with failure. He rounded the last bend and pulled the mule up short. There in the field was Avery, struggling with their old plow. She had hitched their remaining mule to it and was trying to break spring ground, her small frame straining against the heavy implement. The sight stopped his breath. Gabriel jumped down from the wagon, hurrying across the furrows. "Avery, your hands." She showed him her palms, blistered and raw from the wooden handles. "Land needs planting," she said simply. "Cannot wait." Something broke and mended in Gabriel's chest all at once. This child, who had lost everything, was fighting for their future with bloody hands and unwavering determination. Here now, he said gently, taking the plow handles. "Let me help. We'll do it together." They worked until dusk, taking turns with the plow, making slow progress across the field. The earth was hard after winter, but it turned rich and dark, promising life if they could only plant it. That evening, Gabriel built up the fire while Avery soaked her hands in cool water. The small bag of flour and salt sat on the table, enough for perhaps 2 weeks if they were careful. But looking at Avery's quiet strength, Gabriel felt oddly peaceful. "Tell me about your father," he said suddenly. "About the papers he signed." Avery's hands stilled in the water. "Was before soldiers came," she said slowly. "Father raised cattle like you. White men in town say, 'Sign paper, keep grazing land.'" She touched the dog's collar, which never left her possession. "Father sin. Showed them marks on trees, water places, they write everything. But when soldiers came," Gabriel prompted gently. Tears filled her eyes. "They say paper mean nothing. Take cattle, burn tippis." Father tried to show paper again, but she shook her head. "We leave, walk many days." "Father," her voice broke. Gabriel moved to sit beside her, his rough hand covering her small one. "The paper, the deed, you still have it." Avery nodded, reaching into her shirt to pull out a folded, worn document. Gabriel took it carefully, moving closer to the lamplight. His eyes widened as he read. The deed was real, properly signed and witnessed. It granted grazing rights to a substantial portion of land that, he realized with a start, overlapped his own property. "Lord above," he whispered. This wasn't just a piece of paper, it was legitimate legal claim to the land. Perhaps enough to fight the railroad, enough to protect them both. With reverent hands, he opened his mother's Bible, carefully tucking the deed between its pages. "We'll keep it safe here," he told Avery. "Might be this paper saves us both." Avery watched him close the Bible, her expression solemn. "Father say paper have power if right people see." "Yes," Gabriel said thoughtfully. "Reckon your father was right about that." He looked around their humble cabin, at the girl who had become so dear to him, at the precious document now resting between verses of Scripture. Sometimes salvation came in unexpected forms. Outside, a spring wind rustled through new leaves, carrying the scent of turned earth and possibility. They had lost much, but perhaps they had found something worth far more, a way forward. Together, the spring morning dawned clear and cool, sunlight streaming through the cabin windows. Gabriel stood at his wash basin, carefully trimming his beard while Avery swept the wooden floor. Their quiet routine felt almost peaceful, until the thunder of hoofbeats shattered the morning calm. Gabriel's hand stilled on the razor. Through the window he counted 6 riders approaching, their horses kicking up dust along the road. At their lead rode a well-dressed man in a dark suit, too fine for frontier wear. Railroad man, Gabriel knew instantly, his stomach tightening. "Avery," he said quietly, "go to the back room." She gripped her broom tighter, shaking her head. "I stay." Before Gabriel could argue, the riders pulled up in front of the cabin. Horses' flanks were lathered. They'd ridden hard to get here. The man in the suit dismounted first, his polished boots incongruous in the dirt yard. "Mr. Dunbar." The man's voice dripped with false courtesy. "I'm Agent Carver, representing the Western Pacific Railroad Company." He pulled a folded document from his coat. "I've come to discuss the matter of your property." Gabriel stepped onto the porch, positioning himself between the men and his door, where Avery stood watching. "Ain't much to discuss," he said flatly. "This land's not for sale." Carver's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Come now, Mr. Dunbar. Progress can't be stopped. The railroad's coming through these parts, whether you like it or not." He held up a bank draft. "We're prepared to offer fair compensation, $300 for the full parcel." Gabriel's jaw tightened. The amount wouldn't cover half what the land was worth, let alone the improvements he'd made. Answers still no. Carver's gaze shifted past him to Avery, and his smile turned cruel. Interesting company you keep, Mr. Dunbar. Does the army know you're harboring a She's My Ward? Gabriel cut in, his voice deadly quiet. Legal and proper. Is she now? Carver's laugh was sharp as broken glass. And I suppose that's why you're refusing our generous offer, because of some imagined Indian claim to the land. Gabriel reached into his shirt, withdrawing the carefully preserved deed from where he'd been carrying it. Nothing imagined about it. This here's a legal grazing deed, signed and witnessed, granting rights to this very parcel. Her father's marks. On it, plain as day. Carver barely glanced at the document before sneering. That worthless piece of paper. Written promises to savages aren't worth the ink they're printed with. He crumpled the bank draft and tossed it in the dirt. You've got 1 week to clear out, Dunbar. After that, we'll remove you and your ward by whatever means necessary. The threat hung in the air like gun smoke. Gabriel's hands curled into fists as the railroad men wheeled their horses around. Carver's parting shot drifted back. Shame if anything happened to that new barn you're building. Long after the dust settled, Gabriel stood rigid on the porch, fury burning through his veins. With a roar of frustration, he slammed his fist into the wooden table, making the dishes rattle. Pain shot through his knuckles, but it couldn't match the rage in his heart. Gabriel, Avery's soft voice cut through his anger. She touched his arm gently. Violence brings only more violence. Father taught me this. They threatened you. He ground out. Threatened our home. Yes. She pressed something cool into his throbbing hand, a damp cloth. But fighting with fists will not save the land. We must be clever, like fox against wolf pack. Gabriel let her lead him to his chair, by the hearth. The familiar creak of wood as he sat seemed to drain some of his anger, leaving bone-deep weariness in its wake. Avery built up the fire despite the mild evening, understanding his need for its comfort. As darkness gathered outside, the lamplight cast soft shadows on the cabin walls. Gabriel stared into the flames, feeling the weight of memory press down. My Sarah loved this place, he said quietly. We built it together that first year. She'd sing while she worked hymns mostly, voice like an angel. Avery settled cross-legged on the floor near his feet, listening with quiet attention as words he'd held back for years finally spilled out. When the fever took her, his voice roughened. Felt like God himself had turned his back. Couldn't. Bear folks' pitying looks. Their well-meaning words about the Lord's will. Withdrew so far into myself, might as well have died with her. The fire popped and settled, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, a whippoorwill called softly into the gathering night. Thought I was cursed, Gabriel continued. Everything I touched seemed to wither. Figured it was safer to keep to myself than risk bringing harm to others. Then you showed up. He gave a quiet laugh. Reckon the Lord has a sense of humor, sending me an Apache girl to guard when I couldn't even watch over myself proper. Avery was quiet for a long moment, her fingers working the worn leather of the dog's collar she always kept near. Finally, she spoke, her words careful and measured. My people say Creator chooses some to be protectors, she said. Not cursed, chosen. Like the strong trees that shelter young ones from storm. She looked up at him, her dark eyes wise beyond. Her years, you were chosen twice. First with Sarah, now with me. Something broke loose in Gabriel's chest. Not the sharp pain of grief, but a gentler ache, like a frozen stream finally thawing in spring. He reached out hesitantly, resting his hand on Avery's head in a father's blessing. Don't know about being chosen, he said gruffly. But I reckon you're right about one thing. Your family now. Girl, Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Avery leaned against his knee, a gesture of trust that moved him deeply. They sat in comfortable silence as the fire burned low, two souls brought together by loss and hardship, forged into something new and precious, a family born not of blood, but of choice and love. The whippoorwill sang on, its lonely call now, somehow hopeful in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight, in this quiet moment, they were simply father and daughter, finding strength in each other's presence. Sunday morning broke soft and golden over the foothills, the kind of spring day that whispered of God's grace. Gabriel hitched the wagon while Avery plaited her hair, both of them dressed in their humble best. The deed sat carefully folded in Gabriel's worn Bible, a weight heavier than paper alone. "You certain about this?" he asked as they climbed onto the wagon's seat. Folks might not take kindly to what needs saying. Avery smoothed her simple calico dress, one borrowed from the church donation box. "Truth must be spoken," she said quietly, "even when hard." The wagon wheels creaked to steady rhythm as they made their way into town. Already, other families were gathering at the white-painted church, their Sunday clothes bright against the weathered boards. Gabriel noticed how conversations hushed as they approached, how mothers drew children closer. He helped Avery down from the wagon, conscious of every eye upon them. The morning sun caught the silver threads in his dark hair as they climbed the church steps. Inside, the familiar scents of beeswax candles and worn hymnals filled the air. They took their usual seats near the back, where the shadows felt safer. The congregation filled slowly, their whispers like rustling leaves. Gabriel recognized faces he'd known for years, the Cooper family with their 5 children, old Mr. Matthews leaning on his cane, the widow's circle in their customary pew. Some nodded cautiously, others looked away. Preacher Davidson stood to begin the service, his voice strong and clear in the morning light streaming through plain glass windows. "Brothers and sisters," he said, "we gather today in troubled times. Our community faces changes that test our faith and our hearts." His gaze swept the congregation, settling briefly on Gabriel and Avery. "But the good book tells us that justice shall roll down like waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream." The familiar rhythms of worship followed, hymns lifted in uncertain harmony, prayers spoken in well-worn words. Through it all, Gabriel felt the Bible heavy in his hands, the deed within it burning like a coal. After the sermon, just before the final hymn, Preacher Davidson cleared his throat. "Brother Dunbar has asked to address the congregation. In light of recent events, I believe we should hear him." Gabriel stood slowly, his boots scraping on the wooden floor. Avery's eyes followed him as he walked to the front, facing his neighbors. The silence pressed against his ears like cotton wool. "Most of you know me," he began, his voice rough but steady. "Known me since Sarah and I first homesteaded here. Known me through her passing, through my withdrawal from fellowship." He paused, gathering strength. "What you might not know is how the Lord's been working to bring me back to community through an unexpected messenger." He gestured to Avery, who sat straight-backed in her pew. "This girl came to me in the depths of winter, near frozen to death. Could have turned her away, sent her to the army post, but someone wouldn't let me." The morning light caught the silver cross on the altar, throwing sparkles across the gathered faces. "Since then, we've faced trials together. Our barn was burned 3 nights ago, with threats to clear out or face worse." A murmur rippled through the church. Gabriel saw the widows exchange knowing looks, remembered how they'd received his quiet gifts of firewood through their own hard times. Railroad men came, offering pennies on the dollar for land that's rightfully claimed. He opened his Bible, carefully withdrawing the deed. The paper crackled in the hushed air. "This here's proof of that claim. A legal grazing deed signed by territorial officials bearing the mark of Avery's father. It grants rights to the very land they're trying to take. Indian paper ain't worth nothing. Someone called from the back. Several voices muttered agreement. Worth enough for the government to sign it? Gabriel countered firmly. Worth enough for a man's word of honor. He held the document higher. Scripture tells us a righteous man keeps his oath, even when it hurts. Well, this here's an oath made by our government. Are we to be less righteous than what we expect of others? Preacher Davidson stepped forward, taking the deed with careful hands. He studied it in the morning light, his weathered face thoughtful. The congregation seemed to hold its breath. This appears to be a properly executed document, he said, finally. Witnessed and sealed by territorial authorities. He looked up, his gaze sweeping the church. As men and women of faith, we cannot ignore such evidence. I propose we halt any action regarding the railroad's claims until this deed can be properly investigated. The widows were first to nod, led by Mrs. Thompson, who had lost her husband in the war. Gabriel Dunbar's always dealt fair, she declared. Helped many of us through hard times without asking credit. If he says this girl and her claim are honest, I believe him. Support spread like ripples in a pond. The Cooper children's mother spoke up about how Gabriel had helped deliver her youngest during a blizzard. Mr. Matthews recalled him mending fences without being asked. One by one, old kindnesses were remembered, softening hearts that fear had hardened. Not everyone was convinced. Some still muttered about progress and property rights. But Gabriel saw something new in many faces. Consideration, reflection, the stirrings of conscience. Thank you, Brother Dunbar, Preacher Davidson said. We'll take this matter to prayer and careful study. Until then, I believe this deed presents sufficient cause to request the railroad halt its plans. The final hymn rose more strongly than the first, though Gabriel barely heard it through the pounding of his heart. As the congregation filed out into the spring sunshine, several people stopped to shake his hand or offer quiet words of support. The wagon ride home felt lighter somehow, despite the weight of what lay ahead. Gabriel let the horses set an easy pace, watching the shadows of clouds drift across the greening hills. Thank you, Avery said softly, breaking their comfortable silence. For standing with me, for speaking truth. Gabriel glanced at her, seeing not the frightened girl he'd found in the snow, but a daughter growing strong in courage and grace. Reckon we stand together now, he replied. That's what family does. Hope bloomed in his chest like the wild roses starting to dot the hillsides, fragile perhaps, but persistent and sweet. The road ahead might still hold dangers, but they wouldn't face them alone. God's mercy, he was learning, often came wrapped in unexpected packages, bringing healing to more than one wounded heart at a time. The horses' hooves beat a steady rhythm homeward as the spring breeze carried the fading echo of hymns across the valley. They had spoken their truth, and for the first time, others had truly listened. It was enough for today. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but for now, the simple joy of being heard, of standing together, filled their hearts with quiet peace. Summer crept into the valley like a gentle tide, bringing longer days and softer breezes. The charred remains of the old barn gave way to fresh-cut timber and new hope as neighbors pitched in to help rebuild. The Coopers' oldest boys hauled logs while their father helped Gabriel with the framework. Even old Mr. Matthews contributed, sitting in the shade and calling out measurements from his years of carpentry experience. The sound of hammers rang across the property, mingling with something that had been missing for too long: children's laughter. Small faces began appearing at the edge of the property, drawn by curiosity about the Apache girl who lived with the quiet rancher. They brought what they could: cornbread wrapped in cloth, dried apples, a jar of preserved peaches. Avory welcomed them with patience, teaching them to count in Apache. Da, Naki, Tagi. The children repeated the words with delight, their pronunciation making her smile. She showed them how to weave simple baskets from reeds near the creek. Her once frost-bitten fingers, now nimble and sure, Gabriel watched from the new barn's doorway, amazed at how naturally she drew people in. The land itself seemed to respond to their shared care, wells flowing stronger, grass growing thicker where she'd suggested they rotate the grazing. One evening, as the sun painted the hills in shades of gold and purple, they sat together on the porch steps. Gabriel noticed Avery's gaze fixed on the distant ridgeline, her expression distant and wistful. The dog's collar lay in her lap, its leather worn smooth by her frequent touch. "Father used to ride there," she said softly, pointing to a gap between the hills in spring, when grass was new. He would sing to the cattle. Her voice caught slightly. "I miss them, my people." The songs, the stories. Gabriel set his coffee cup down carefully. "You must miss them something fierce." Avery nodded, then turned to look at him with clear eyes. "But here, with you, I feel safe now, like having father again." The simple trust in her words humbled him. Gabriel laid his weathered hand over hers. "Long as I draw breath, you'll have a home here. That's a promise." The moment hung between them, peaceful as the evening star just beginning to shine. Then came the sound of hoofbeats, a rider approaching fast. The boy from the telegraph office appeared in the yard. Waving a yellow paper, Gabriel's hands trembled slightly as he read the telegram's stark message. The railroad was done waiting. Men with legal papers and government authority would arrive within days to seize the land by force if necessary. He looked at Avery, seeing the fear creep back into her eyes, and felt his jaw tighten with resolve. They'd rebuilt more than just a barn here. They'd built a family, and he meant to fight for it. The next morning, hoofbeats thundered into Gabriel's yard. Railroad agent Carver dismounted, flanked by Deputy Harlan and 3 hired men. Their horses stomped restlessly in the dirt as Carver waved official papers. "Time's up, Dunbar." "Clear out or we'll remove you," Carver called, his voice sharp as a blade. But before Gabriel could answer, wagon wheels creaked on the road. The preacher's buggy appeared, followed by 3 wagons carrying the widow's circle and several ranchers from town. They formed a half-circle behind Gabriel's cabin, faces stern with purpose. Avery stepped forward, the dog's collar gleaming in her hands. Her voice carried across the yard, clear and strong. "My father signed papers for this land. He grazed cattle. Here, paid in silver." She held up the deed. "This proves our right. Our story is true." The preacher moved to stand beside her. "Providence has spoken plain as day," he declared. Raising his voice, "This land belongs to both of them. God's mercy works through unexpected hands." Carver's face darkened, but he glanced at the crowd of neighbors. Outnumbered and morally defeated, he jerked his reins. "This isn't over, Dunbar," he spat, leading his men away. That evening, the cabin buzzed with voices and warmth. Neighbors crowded around Gabriel's table, passing bowls and sharing stories. Avery moved among them, offering fresh bread with a shy smile that spoke of belonging. When Gabriel bowed his head to pray, his voice rang steady with gratitude. "Lord, thank you for sending angels in work clothes and for giving this broken man a family again." Weeks passed, and summer's warmth filled the ranch with new life. Fresh plantings dotted the garden, their green shoots reaching skyward. Neighbors dropped by often now, bringing pies and friendly conversation. One morning, Widow Martinez brought a special gift, a squirming puppy from her dog's litter. "The mama was that stray's mate," she explained softly. The pup bounded straight to Avery's tail, wagging. "Plant your feet firm, like this," Gabriel showed Avery later, demonstrating how to split wood. The axe swooshed through the air as she copied his stance. Their laughter mixed with the puppy's excited barks as it chased chickens across the yard. That evening, they sat by the hearth, watching flames dance. The dog's collar and the deed rested side by side on the mantel, symbols of their journey. Gabriel smiled, remembering how God had sent a loyal stray that led him to a daughter. "Family," Avery whispered, her eyes bright. "Forever," Gabriel answered softly, outside. The puppy waited on the cabin steps, just as faithful as its father before. Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity.